You know, usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this expectation of precision.
Right. Like you expect a very clear answer.
Yeah, you think of it almost like engineering. I mean, you fall off a ladder, your arm hurts, and you go to the hospital.
And they run the tests.
Right. The technician takes an x-ray, and, a few minutes later, the doctor puts that image up on the screen. They look at the bones, they point to that jagged white line fracturing the radius, and they say, there it is.
It is entirely binary. The bone is either broken or it is not broken.
Yeah.
The visual evidence is just right there in front of you.
Yeah, and there is something incredibly comforting about that, right?
Yeah.
We humans really like things to be visible.
Oh,
We
absolutely.
like things to be categorized, measured, and, put into neat little boxes. But then you step into the world of human character, and specifically the concept of pride and humility.
And suddenly that X-ray machine is just broken.
Right. We are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is entirely murky. I mean, we cannot take a scan of the human ego. We cannot measure self-righteousness with a blood test.
No, we cannot. It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Yeah.
When you ask a person if they are humble, well, their answer is almost always compromised by their own ego.
Right. The very act of claiming to be humble often proves that a person is not.
Spot on.
Yeah.
We just lack a reliable instrument to measure the human soul.
Well, welcome to Reformed Thinking. I am so glad you decided to join us today. If you are listening to this, you are probably like us, someone who wants to look past the surface of things.
Someone who wants to understand the actual mechanics of the human heart without settling for easy cliches.
Yeah, so what if we could calibrate that broken x-ray machine? What if there was a reliable way to measure the human soul with absolute precision?
That is a fascinating question.
Today, we are putting human humility under the microscope. Our mission in this deep dive is to understand the true nature of humility. We are going to strip away all those modern misconceptions we all carry around about what it means to be humble.
And we are going to see how true Christian love organically produces a humble heart.
Right. To do that, we're analyzing some really remarkable source material today. We are unpacking excerpts from Jonathan Edwards' classic work, Charity and Its Fruits.
Yes, specifically, we are focusing on a series of thoughts he delivered regarding the idea that the spirit of charity is an humble spirit.
And for some context, Edwards delivered these thoughts originally as a series of lectures in 1738. He was focusing intensely on the Apostle Paul's definition of love in the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians.
Right, the famous love chapter.
Okay, let's unpack this. Edwards starts by connecting humility directly to that famous passage, the one almost everyone hears at weddings.
Yeah, 1 Corinthians 13.
Right, the Apostle Paul writes that charity, or Christian love, vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, doth not behave itself unseemly.
Which is such a specific phrasing.
It really is. And Edwards draws a direct line between this kind of love and the prevention of envy. But he does it in a way that feels like a psychological masterclass.
He really does. He argues that charity acts as a two-way shield.
A two-way shield. That is a really great way to frame it.
Yeah, Edwards looks at the text and notices that charity protects both the person feeling it and the people around them.
Okay, how so?
Well, on one side, it stops us from envying the prosperity of others. If you possess genuine love for your neighbor, you do not experience bitterness when they succeed.
Right, because love desires their good.
Exactly. I mean, spot on. You rejoice in their success.
Yeah.
But on the other side, it stops us from gloating over our own prosperity.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, Edwards points out this really fascinating social dynamic. When we succeed and we become puffed up, or we vaunt ourselves, that behavior is what actually provokes envy in the people around us.
So if I am constantly bragging about my new promotion or, making sure everyone knows how smart my kids are, I am actively creating an environment where envy thrives.
Yes, you are tossing gasoline on the insecurities of your neighbors.
Wow, that is so true.
Charity makes a person behave suitably in whatever condition they find themselves.
Right.
If you are below others in status, wealth, or natural talents, love keeps you from resenting those who have more.
And if you are above others in those same categories,
Love keeps you from being a braggart. It neutralizes the toxic social hierarchy that pride constantly tries to enforce.
it is a brilliant social mechanism. It just smooths out the friction in society.
It really does.
So if we want to understand how charity prevents us from being puffed up, we have to define the mindset that keeps us grounded, right?
Right, we have to look at the internal engine driving this behavior.
And that leads to Edwards' definition of humility, which brings us to the first major concept we need to look into: the infinite gap.
The infinite gap.
Yeah, Edwards uses a word here that might throw modern readers off. He defines humility as a habit of mind corresponding to our comparative meanness in God's sight.
Yes, meanness.
I have to pause on that word. To modern ears, meanness sounds like cruelty or malice, right? We think of like a middle school bully stealing lunch money.
Yeah, it has a very negative connotation today.
Is he saying we're supposed to feel like malicious, cruel people?
Not at all.
Right.
In the 18th century, Edwards is not using meanness to denote cruelty or a bad temper.
Okay.
He is using it to mean littleness, commonness, or nothingness.
Oh, I see.
Is a measure of scale, not a measure of malice. He's talking about the vast, infinite distance between a created being and the creator.
So humility in its most basic sense is simply possessing an accurate assessment of that scale.
Spot on. It is just measuring correctly.
I want to make sure we nail down this concept of scale because it feels like the hinge for everything else Edwards says.
It really is.
If we think of a single grain of sand trying to compare itself to the entire Sahara Desert, we get a sense of size difference.
Right, that is a huge gap.
But even that feels insufficient because a grain of sand is still made of the same material as the desert. It is just smaller.
Yeah, that analogy falls a bit short.
Is it more like a two-dimensional stick figure drawn on a piece of paper trying to comprehend a massive three-dimensional universe? I mean, it is not just a matter of being physically smaller. It is an entirely different plane of existence.
The two-dimensional drawing analogy captures the essence much better. Edwards is talking about the ontological difference between the creator and the creature.
Ontological difference.
Right. God is infinite, eternal, and self-existent. We are finite, temporal, and entirely dependent on him for our existence second by second.
Wow.
So meanness means a complete lack of comparative substance. When you measure a finite object against an infinite standard, the mathematical result is always zero.
Zero. That is striking.
Yeah, humility is a habit of mind that recognizes this zero state.
It shifts our whole perspective. I want you to think about this as you are listening. Humility is not about beating yourself up.
No, not at all.
It is not walking around with your head hung low, pretending you have no skills or intelligence. That is a false modesty.
Right, that is just playing a part.
True humility is about accurate measurement. If you measure yourself against the infinite, you naturally get a realistic view of your own size.
Edwards points out something that shocks a lot of people when they first read it.
Oh, what is that?
He notes that even unfallen, perfectly holy beings possess this humility. The angels in heaven, who have never sinned, are incredibly humble.
Wait, really?
Yes, and the human nature of Jesus Christ was entirely humble.
That is a massive paradigm shift. We usually associate humility with apologizing for our mistakes or, admitting our flaws.
Right, we link it to guilt.
But if sinless angels are humble, then humility fundamentally has nothing to do with sin.
You have hit on the core issue, because even without sin, a created being is finite. They recognize their finite nature against an infinite creator.
They know they are not the source of all things.
Exactly. I mean, God cannot be humble because God cannot have comparative meanness. He is the highest, the self-existent one.
Right.
But every created intelligence must possess humility to function properly in reality.
Yeah.
The angels see reality clearly. They know they are the two-dimensional drawing, and they know God is the three-dimensional universe.
Edwards brings up a great example from the book of Genesis here. He cites Abraham in chapter 18.
Oh, yes, the negotiation for Sodom.
Yeah, Abraham is standing before the Lord negotiating for the city of Sodom. And Abraham says, "Behold now, I have taken upon me to speak unto the Lord, which am but dust and ashes."
Dust and ashes.
Right. Abraham rightly recognized his material, creaturely state. He was quite literally made from the dust of the ground.
And there is no true humility without this specific awareness. You might feel small compared to a billionaire, or you might feel intellectually inferior to a brilliant scientist, but if you do not feel your nothingness compared to God, you lack the core ingredient of true humility.
Because human-to-human comparisons always fail.
Right, because you are comparing two finite things. You are just comparing two grains of sand. True measurement only happens when the creature looks at the creator.
But having established that even perfect angels are little compared to God, we have to deal with the reality of the human condition.
Right. Things get worse for us.
Yeah, we are not just finite creatures like the angels. We have a different problem entirely, which introduces a severe complication to the X-ray machine we talked about. We might call this the tenfold drop.
The tenfold drop.
Yeah, we are moving from littleness to vileness.
Edwards distinguishes between natural meanness and moral meanness.
Okay, break that down.
Natural meanness is what we just discussed. Our littleness as a creature. It is the fact that our knowledge is small, our strength is limited, and we depend on God for our next breath.
Right.
Unfallen man, Adam, before his rebellion, possessed this natural meanness. He was infinitely distant from God in attributes like wisdom and majesty, and he joyfully recognized that fact.
But something broke.
Yes, the fall.
Since the fall of humanity into sin, our natural faculties are impaired. We are no longer just small, we are corrupt.
And Edwards says, this creates a tenfold meanness.
Can we break down what that actually means for our psychology? Because when we talk about the fall and impaired natural faculties, it can sound like academic jargon.
Sure. Think of it this way. Your natural faculties are your mind, your will, and your affections.
Okay.
In a healthy, unfallen state, your mind understands God as the greatest good, your will chooses to obey him, and your affections love him above all else.
Everything works properly.
Right. The fall was essentially a catastrophic rebellion that inverted all of those faculties.
Each turned them upside down.
Yeah. Now, the human mind suppresses the truth about God. The human will constantly chooses its own autonomy over God's rule. And the human affections love created things more than the Creator. The machinery is entirely backwards.
So it is no longer just a lack of size. It is a pollution before an infinitely holy God. Edwards describes moral meanness as our vileness and filthiness as a sinner. A truly humble person sees two distinct things, right?
Right. They see they are a tiny creature, and they see they are a polluted creature standing in the presence of absolute purity.
Edwards brings up the prophet Isaiah to illustrate this reaction.
That is such a vivid passage.
It really is. In the 6th chapter of Isaiah, the prophet receives a vision of God's throne room. The seraphim are calling out, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts."
And Isaiah's immediate reaction is not, wow, look at the architecture, or what an incredible spiritual experience I am having.
No, not at all.
His reaction is absolute terror. He cries out, "Woe is me, for I am undone because I am a man of unclean lips."
And we see the exact same thing in the book of Job.
Yes, at the end of the book.
After God speaks to Job out of the whirlwind, revealing his sovereign strength over creation, Job says, "Wherefore I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes."
Those are the reactions of men who suddenly had the cosmic X-ray machine turned on. They saw the reality of their moral state exposed in the blazing light of God's absolute holiness.
They realize their absolute dependence on God for everything.
Right, not just for their daily bread, but for mercy. They realized that if God treated them according to their moral purity, they would be consumed.
So what does this actually mean for you listening right now, going about your daily life? How does knowing about your moral ruin actually help you?
It is a fair question.
I think realizing our absolute dependence on God for everything actually eliminates the illusion of self-sufficiency, and that illusion causes so much modern anxiety.
Oh, absolutely.
We walk around terrified because we think we have to hold our own universe together. We think our success or failure rests entirely on our own shoulders.
It is an exhausting way to live.
It is. Admitting our natural and moral littleness gives us permission to stop pretending we are in control. It pops the exhausting bubble of the ego.
If we connect this to the broader theological framework, this realization of moral ruin requires total reliance on God's grace.
Right.
It aligns perfectly with the concept of being poor in spirit from the Sermon on the Mount. When Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven," he's describing this exact state.
Let's expand on that phrase, poor in spirit. It is one of those phrases people hear in church and just assume it means being sad or maybe lacking financial wealth.
Yeah, that is a common misconception. A person who is poor in spirit knows their spiritual bank account is entirely bankrupt.
Bankrupt.
Right. They bring absolutely nothing to the table to negotiate with God. They have no moral currency. They recognize their tenfold meanness.
And paradoxically, that posture of total bankruptcy is the only posture that can receive grace. You cannot fill a cup that is already full of itself.
Spot on.
But there's a massive paradox here. If simply realizing God is bigger than us makes us humble, and realizing his holiness exposes our flaws, then shouldn't the demons be the most humble creatures in existence?
That is a brilliant question.
I mean, they know exactly how powerful God is. They have experienced his judgment firsthand. Why are they consumed by pride instead?
It is a puzzle.
This forces a crucial distinction in the text. Here's where it gets really interesting, and I think it is the most surprising theological nugget in Edwards' whole argument.
It is a stunning observation, and it completely dismantles how most people think about religious belief.
So how does Edwards explain it?
He points out that demons and damned spirits are keenly aware of God's majesty. They know his wisdom. They know his omnipotence far better than any human theologian.
Right, they have seen it.
In fact, God's dealings with them and their own sufferings make them feel this gap intensely. They know how much God is above them. The book of James says, the devils also believe and tremble.
They shudder at his power.
Yes, and yet they possess absolutely zero humility. They are completely filled with pride, malice, and rebellion.
How is that logically possible? If humility is recognizing the gap between the creature and the creator, and demons clearly recognize the gap, why aren't they humble?
Because of the missing ingredient.
Which is?
Loveliness.
Loveliness.
Yeah. The devils see God's massive scale, but they are entirely blind to his beauty and excellence.
Oh, wow.
Edwards argues that true humility only blossoms when a creature feels their distance from God in greatness and is simultaneously captivated by his loveliness.
That changes everything.
It does. The demons see the greatness, but they hate the one who holds it. Therefore, their awareness of the gap only produces terror and a hardened, rebellious pride.
Think about this in a human psychological context. It is like the difference between working for a tyrannical boss and learning from a highly respected mentor.
That is a great analogy.
An employee might cower before the tyrannical boss. They know the boss has the authority to fire them, ruin their career, and make their daily life miserable.
The power dynamic is very clear.
Right. The employee feels the gap in power intensely, but they do not humble themselves inwardly. They do not admire the boss. They just harbor deep resentment, fear, and a desire to overthrow the boss if they ever get the chance.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the dynamic. The employee complies out of self-preservation, not out of humility.
But take that same employee and put them in a room with a mentor they highly respect.
Right.
This is someone whose character they admire, someone who has demonstrated genuine care for them. They find this mentor, in Edwards' terminology, lovely.
Yes.
That employee will willingly humble themselves. They will eagerly sit and listen. They will accept sharp correction without getting defensive because they admire the mentor's character. The submission is a joy, not a burden.
The devils cower before the tyrant in their distorted view of God. They shudder at his raw power, but they do not bow in their hearts.
Because they lack that admiration.
Exactly. A terrifying awareness of God's judgment without an appreciation for his mercy, grace, and beauty only produces rebellious pride, never true contrition.
And the angels.
The angels and the ransomed human spirits in heaven, on the other hand, see both. They see how much greater God is, and they see how much more lovely he is.
And that combination is the key.
It is. That specific combination creates the joyful, willing submission that characterizes genuine humility.
It changes everything about how we approach religion. If you only focus on God's wrath, his size, and his rules, you might become compliant out of sheer terror.
Yes, you might modify your behavior to avoid punishment.
But your heart will remain proud and resentful. You will never become truly humble. You have to see the beauty of his grace. You have to see that the infinite creator actually cares for the two-dimensional stick figure.
Because true humility involves seeing both God's infinite greatness and his captivating loveliness. It naturally provokes a specific behavioral response directed back at him.
Right.
This leads us to the upward posture. Internal fight always produces external action.
So how does this humility actually act toward God?
Edwards outlines 4 distinct ways this humility manifests in our relationship with the Creator. First, it freely acknowledges one's nothingness.
And the key word there is freely.
Yes, the humble soul does this willingly, even with delight. They do not have to be dragged into the courtroom and forced to admit they are unworthy of mercy under cross-examination.
They gladly confess their total dependence because they love the one they are depending on.
Right. Second, humility distrusts self and relies solely on God.
I want to analyze this one closely because it runs contrary to every message we receive in modern society.
It really does.
We are bombarded with the mantra to believe in yourself, trust your truth, and look within for the answers.
Constant messaging.
And Edwards is saying the exact opposite. He is saying, no, distrust yourself entirely and look outside yourself to God.
The modern self-esteem movement assumes that the human heart is fundamentally good and reliable.
Right?
But Reformed theology, echoing the biblical witness, argues that the human heart is deceitful. The proud person assumes their own wisdom, logic, or emotional intuition is sufficient to guide their life.
And the humble person.
The humble person is deeply suspicious of their own heart. They know their faculties are impaired by the fall. Therefore, they lean entirely on God's revealed word as their refuge and compass.
The third way humility acts toward God is by renouncing all glory. If there is any good done, any success achieved, the humble person does not vaunt themselves.
No, they ascribe it all to God.
Edwards quotes Psalm 115, verse 1.
Not unto us, O Lord, not unto us, but unto thy name give glory for thy mercy and for thy truth's sake.
It is an active renunciation.
You are actively taking the crown off your own head and handing it back to the one it belongs to.
And fourth, they wholly subject themselves to God's will and providence. Their heart is not opposed to God giving them laws, and they are equally disposed to submit to his daily providence.
They recognize God's absolute sovereignty over every detail of the universe, including their own lives.
Exactly.
I want to push back on that last point, or at least ask a hard question for the sake of anyone listening who is going through a dark season.
Okay, let's hear it. Edwards says true humility means looking at afflictions or low circumstances and not murmuring. The humble soul recognizes that they deserve far worse, making them able to say with Job, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him."
Right.
But how is a listener supposed to apply this when facing genuine, agonizing hardship? If someone loses a child or receives a terminal cancer diagnosis, isn't it human nature to demand answers from God?
It is completely natural to feel that way.
Is Edwards saying we just have to act like unfeeling robots and suppress our grief?
Edwards is not advocating for a cold stoicism at all. Crying out to God in intense pain is thoroughly biblical.
We see it in the Psalms.
We see it all through the Psalms' lament. We see Jesus weeping at the tomb of Lazarus. God welcomes our tears, our sorrow, and our honest grief.
Okay, so what is the difference?
There is a massive difference between crying out in pain and demanding that God answer to our personal standards of justice.
Ah, I see.
Demanding that God justify his actions to us is the height of pride. It assumes our finite, impaired minds have the right and the intellectual capacity to judge the infinite mind.
We want to put God in the witness box and cross-examine him until we are satisfied with his management of the universe.
Right. Humility yields to his authority. It trusts that the infinite mind knows best, even when the finite mind is completely in the dark and experiencing deep sorrow.
That is a hard place to be.
It is.
No.
It is the ability to say, I am hurting, I do not understand this at all, but I know you are entirely good, and I yield to your sovereign right to govern my life.
It relies on that concept of providence.
Yeah.
That God is holy, wise, and powerful, preserving and governing all his creatures and all their actions. It is the ultimate letting go. It requires an incredible amount of trust in that loveliness we talked about earlier.
It really does.
If God is just great, you resent the suffering. If God is great and lovely, you can trust him through the suffering.
And if a person genuinely holds this internal upward posture toward God, it is impossible for it not to spill over into their daily horizontal interactions with other humans.
Right.
Humility toward the Creator guarantees a specific posture toward the creature.
This brings us to the horizontal proof. Edwards gives us a very practical, systematic breakdown of 7 social behaviors that true humility prevents.
This is where the theology hits the pavement.
Yeah, if you want to know if your internal posture toward God is correct, you do not look at how high you raise your hands during a worship song. You look at how you treat your coworkers, your spouse, your neighbors, and the cashier at the grocery store.
These 7 behaviors operate in a chain reaction. When the ego is neutralized by a vision of God's greatness, it fundamentally alters how a person seeks validation in society.
Okay, let's go through them. What is the first one?
The first behavior Edwards notes that humility prevents is ambitious behavior. A person under the influence of an humble spirit is content with the situation God has allotted to them.
So they aren't trying to conquer the world.
Right. They are not greedy for honor or worldly power.
They heed the prophet Jeremiah's words to Baruch, "Seekest thou great things for thyself? Seek them not."
Yes.
This flies directly in the face of modern hustle culture. We are constantly told to climb the corporate ladder, to build our personal brand, to maximize our influence, to make sure everyone knows our name.
It is the air we breathe.
Edwards is saying that a relentless drive for personal exaltation is a glaring symptom of pride.
But, to clarify, he's not saying you should avoid hard work or refuse to use your talents.
Right, a humble person can be a brilliant surgeon or a highly effective CEO.
Absolutely. But he is targeting the internal motive. Are you working to be useful to society and honoring to God, or are you working to be seen as superior to your peers?
It all comes down to the motive.
Yes. And if you are not ambitious for your own glory, you naturally lose the desire to display your perceived greatness.
Which leads to the second point.
Exactly. This means humility eliminates ostentatious behavior.
Ostentatious behavior.
If a humble man possesses an advantage, whether it is natural abilities, significant wealth, or even profound spiritual experiences, he will not make a show of it. He will not parade his gifts so that others recognize his superiority.
This is the 18th century diagnosis of the social media humble brag.
Oh, that is a perfect modern equivalent.
You know the posts. Someone posts a beautifully filtered picture of their incredibly expensive European vacation, but the caption is a long paragraph about how exhausted they are or how blessed they feel to simply pause and reflect.
Right, the focus isn't really on being tired.
No. They desperately want you to notice their wealth and superiority, but they try to dress it up in the language of gratitude.
Or in religious circles, it is the person who always manages to bring up how early they woke up to pray.
Oh, yeah.
Or casually mentions how much money they gave to a specific charity. They want the applause of the crowd.
And Edward says humility prevents that entirely.
It does. The humble person is completely content that the great being who sees in secret beholds and approves of their actions. They do not need human validation because they already have divine approval.
And if you do not feel the need to be ostentatious, you lose the arrogance that ruins so many relationships.
That is the third behavior.
Arrogant or assuming behavior. A humble person does not carry themselves as if they expect everyone to bow to their opinions.
They do not treat themselves as the most valuable person in the room.
Right. They give genuine deference to the judgment of others.
We see the opposite of this constantly in professional environments. It is the person in the meeting who talks over everyone else, who assumes their idea is obviously the only intelligent option.
The one who acts like everyone else is just there to execute their brilliant vision.
Yes, it drains the life out of a room. Humility prevents that suffocating arrogance. It allows you to genuinely listen to other people, to ask questions, and to change your mind because you do not assume you have a monopoly on wisdom.
Which leads right into the prevention of scornful behavior, which is number 4.
Right.
If you do not think you are the smartest person in the room, you cannot look down on the people around you. Edwards describes scorn as treating others with contempt or ridicule, looking down on those below you with a haughty, supercilious air.
He says the proud person treats others as though they were scarcely worthy of their regard.
I instantly think of internet troll culture and the outrage machine of modern social media.
Oh, that is the perfect example.
The entire system runs on scorn. We build our social in-groups by mocking out-groups. We sit around and relate what others have said or done just to make sport of it.
It's so common.
It is a massive social currency right now to be witty, sarcastic, and cutting at someone else's expense. We elevate our own status by tearing someone else down.
Edwards counters that toxic culture with the biblical alternative. Humility disposes a person to condescend to men of low estate.
Condescend in a good way.
Yes,
Yeah.
not in a patronizing way. It means treating inferiors, whether they're younger, less educated, or working in a lower socioeconomic position, with genuine courtesy and affability.
Oh.
A humble person realizes that it is God alone who makes them to differ from anyone else. If you have an advantage in intelligence, health, or wealth, it is an unearned gift from a sovereign God, not a reason to mock those who lack it.
And when you stop mocking people, you realize you don't always have to win every disagreement. This eliminates stubborn or willful behavior, our 5th point.
Right. A humble person will not set up their own will and insist that everything must go according to their specific plan. They do not make everyone around them uneasy just because they didn't get their way. But this raises an important question.
What is that?
Does this mean a humble person is just a passive pushover? Does it mean they never stand their ground or fight for what is right?
That is a great question.
Edwards addresses this carefully. He states that a humble man is inflexible only in the cause of his Lord and Master, which is the cause of truth and virtue.
Okay, so there is a time to stand firm.
Yes. When conscience and God's moral law require it, the humble person is absolutely unbending. But in all private matters, things that only concern their own personal interests or preferences, they are highly apt to yield to others for the sake of peace.
Think about the arguments that tear apart extended families or even cause massive church splits.
Oh, it is tragic.
Usually it is not over massive theological truths like the resurrection or the Trinity. It is over preferences.
Like the carpet color.
Yes.
Oh.
It is over who was offended at Thanksgiving dinner, or what color the new carpet in the lobby should be, or what style of music the band is playing.
Petty things.
We dig our heels in over things that fundamentally do not matter because our pride cannot handle the perceived indignity of yielding. We want to win the argument.
It is all about ego.
Humility says, I will lose this argument about where we go to dinner or what color the walls are because the peace of this community is infinitely more valuable than my personal preference.
Because a humble person yields their preferences. They are not threatened by the success or authority of others. This prevents what Edwards calls leveling behavior.
Number 6. I really want to look into the psychology of this term. Leveling behavior sounds incredibly relevant to our current cultural moment.
Leveling behavior is the tendency to tear down superiors to your own level while simultaneously refusing to lift inferiors up to your level.
That is a fascinating dynamic.
It is a fundamental refusal to render honor where honor is due. A person who exhibits leveling behavior cannot stand the idea that anyone is above them in authority, talent, or public honor. They constantly criticize, nitpick, and diminish those in leadership or high positions.
It is what they call tall poppy syndrome in Australia and New Zealand.
Right, exactly.
If a poppy grows taller than the rest of the field, you cut it down so the field looks even. We see this constantly in our media cycles.
We really do.
We love to build heroes up, whether they are athletes, politicians, or artists, and then we ruthlessly tear them down to prove they are no better than we are. We comb through their past to find a flaw so we can drag them back down to the mud with the rest of us.
It is a defense mechanism for the fragile ego. But Edwards says a humble person is content with the divine arrangement, that there are gradations in society.
Right.
They are willing to obey civil magistrates, render tribute where tribute is due, and give honor where honor is due.
Right.
They're not threatened by someone else having authority over them because their ultimate identity is secure in their relationship with God, not in their social rank.
Finally, we reach the last behavior humility prevents, number 7. And it might be the most difficult one of all to conquer self-justifying behavior.
Oh, that is a tough one.
When a humble person falls into a fault, makes a mistake, or injures another person, they are willing to acknowledge it and take the shame to themselves. They do not fight a bitter war to defend themselves when they know they are in the wrong.
It is agonizing for proud people to admit fault. The human mind will deploy incredible amounts of mental gymnastics to explain why our bad behavior was actually justified or why it was fundamentally someone else's fault.
We say things like, I wouldn't have yelled at you if you hadn't forgotten to pay the bill.
Right, shifting the blame.
Or, I know I lied, but the system is rigged against me anyway.
Yeah.
That is pure self-justification. We act as our own defense attorney.
Edwards highlights the command in James 5.1:1, confess your faults one to another. He notes that a humble person actually prizes reproof.
We prize it.
Yes. When a neighbor, a spouse, or a friend offers Christian admonition, the proud person becomes intensely angry and bitter. They attack the messenger.
And the humble person.
The humble person treats that correction as an excellent oil, as the psalmist describes it. They see correction as a profound mark of kindness because they know their own heart is deceitful, and they know they are often blind to their own glaring faults.
I want to challenge you, as you're listening to this, to run your own workplace dynamics or your family interactions through this checklist. We just covered a lot of ground.
It is a very convicting list.
Ask yourself honestly, are you ambitious for your own glory? Are you ostentatious with your achievements on social media? Do you assume everyone should listen to your opinions? Do you scorn and mock those who disagree with you? Are you stubborn over petty private preferences? Do you actively resent those in authority over you? Do you violently defend yourself when someone offers a mild criticism?
It is a brutal mirror to look into.
But it is a necessary diagnostic tool.
Having laid out that rigorous behavioral checklist, Edwards acknowledges a trap, which leads us to a necessary diagnostic test.
Okay, what is the trap?
Human beings are incredibly clever, and people can fake these outward behaviors. You can act yielding or avoid ostentatious displays for entirely selfish and manipulative reasons.
Oh, that makes sense.
So how do we know if our humility is authentic or a counterfeit production of the ego?
Right, you might act quiet and unassuming just because you want people to praise you for being so quiet and unassuming.
Exactly.
You are using the appearance of humility to feed your ambition for praise. It is a psychological hall of mirrors.
Edwards details several imitations to help us spot the counterfeit. The first is affected humility, which is basically play acting.
Like putting on a show.
Right. It is adopting a pious tone of voice or wearing shabby clothes to signal to everyone how detached you are from the world.
What is the second one?
The second counterfeit is natural low-spiritedness. This is a crucial distinction. Some people are just naturally timid, or lack physical courage, or have a melancholy temperament.
Okay.
They might seem humble because they never speak up in a meeting and never assert themselves, but their silence is born of fear, social anxiety, or clinical depression, not a spiritual apprehension of God's infinite greatness.
I think this is a massive point of confusion in modern church culture. We often confuse introversion or shyness with spiritual humility.
We do.
But being shy or lacking confidence is not the same as having a joyful submission to God's vastness. A shy person might still be incredibly proud, sitting in the corner, internally boiling with resentment that they aren't being recognized by the crowd.
Right, their focus is still entirely on themselves. They are just afraid of failure.
Interesting.
Edwards also mentions temporary depression under a guilty conscience. A person might act very abased and broken when they are caught in a public scandal, or when they are facing severe legal or financial adversity.
They are just sorry they got caught.
Exactly. They
Yeah.
weep, they apologize, they look completely humbled. But as soon as the pressure is off, as soon as the threat of punishment fades, their native pride returns with full force.
That is so common.
He even mentions a counterfeit humility wrought by the delusions of Satan, designed to make a person focus so much on their own worthlessness that they despair of God's grace entirely.
So how does true humility look different from timidity? A truly humble person can actually be incredibly bold. Look at the apostles in the New Testament. Peter and John stood before the Sanhedrin, the religious elite, the very men who had the political authority to execute them. They boldly defied orders to stop preaching.
They were certainly not timid.
No, they were not low-spirited, they didn't cower in the corner, but they were incredibly humble because their confidence rested entirely on God's strength, not their own. They knew they were just two-dimensional stick figures, but they knew the three-dimensional God had commanded them to speak.
Edwards concludes this analysis with a severe, sobering warning to the prideful. He highlights that pride is the specific, defining sin of devils.
The sin of devils.
Yes. When a human being refuses to submit to God, disregards his sovereignty, and trusts in their own strength and wisdom, they are imitating the exact posture of Satan. The Apostle Paul warns Timothy not to ordain a novice, lest being lifted up with pride he fall into the condemnation of the devil.
It is not just a minor character flaw, it is aligning yourself with the cosmic rebellion.
Edwards points out that God sets himself in battle array against the proud. He lists biblical examples of terrible judgments falling on those who exalted themselves.
Like Pharaoh.
Yes, Pharaoh, who stubbornly refused to let Israel go, asking, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice?"
And Belshazzar.
Belshazzar, who arrogantly drank wine from the sacred vessels of the temple while praising gods of gold and silver.
And Herod.
Herod, who accepted the worship of the crowd, allowing them to call his voice the voice of a god, and was immediately struck down. God actively, vehemently opposes pride because it is a direct assault on his reality and his sovereign throne.
It is a sobering thought to end our textual analysis on. We have covered a massive amount of conceptual ground today.
We really have.
If we pull all these threads together, it comes down to this. True humility is not feeling bad about yourself. It is not walking around with a manufactured sense of sadness.
No, it starts with an accurate measurement.
It is measuring our finite, fallen selves against God's infinite greatness and his captivating, beautiful grace. When we see that reality clearly, it totally reworks our relationship with heaven and earth. We stop demanding that God answer to us, and we stop demanding worship and validation from our neighbors.
The practical application for the listener is to actively seek this spirit. We cannot manufacture it through sheer willpower, but we can put ourselves in a posture to receive it.
How do we do that?
We must consistently confess our comparative nothingness, aggressively distrust our own self-sufficiency, and actively fight against those arrogant, scornful, and self-justifying habits Edwards outlined.
Right.
As the psalmist notes, a broken and contrite heart is the most acceptable sacrifice we can offer to God. It is the only soil where genuine charity can grow.
I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on, something that builds on everything we have discussed today. We live in a society that equates relentless self-promotion with basic survival.
Oh, without a doubt.
Whether you are in a high-stakes job interview, setting up a dating app profile, or networking at an industry conference, the universally accepted rule is to amplify your strengths, hide your weaknesses, and project an aura of absolute confidence. We are told to build a brand out of our own ego.
It is exhausting.
But what if the exact opposite is true? Is it possible that radical Edward-style humility is actually the most magnetic and countercultural trait a human being can possess today?
That is a brilliant way to frame it.
Think about how refreshing it is to meet someone who doesn't need to prove they are the smartest person in the room. Think about how attractive it is to be around someone who is entirely secure in God's love so they don't need to harvest praise from you. What if aiming for nothingness before God is the only way to actually become whole?
It completely flips the script on what the modern world values as success and strength.
It really does. It fixes that broken X-ray machine. It clears up the muddy waters of our own self-deception and shows us what a healthy, properly calibrated human soul actually looks like. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope this has challenged your thinking, exposed some of the pride we all carry, and given you a new framework for looking at your own heart. Until next time, keep looking past the surface. Take care.